Hi everybody. I new video. I haven't done a video in a long time. I've been busy. I moved. New room, as you can see. I'm not gonna do a room overview till later on. I'm still not quite ready. It's pretty much there, but I just have a couple other things to do. I wanted to finally get around to doing a slowpoke response to Maximum RD in the community about emulation, your experiences with it, your views on it, etc. Other people like Lactobacillus Prime and a few others have also piped in. And I figured now that the holidays are over, things are a bit more quiet, well, quieted down here. I give my views, story, etc. Well, I guess first my story is I encountered emulation around the Pentium slash Pentium 2 era, right on that cusp there. Was volunteering at a local library, and the library had a Pentium 75 and a Pentium 200 MMX there, and a friend of mine showed me this thing called Emulation and this program called Nesticle. And so I discovered that you could actually download ROMs and play them on this thing called an emulator. Super Nintendo wasn't quite there until later on when we discovered ZNES, and it worked quite fine on the Pentium 200 MMX there at the lab, and it was quite good. And then by the time my second year in university rolled around, I was able to have my own laptop, new to me. It was 1998, and I bought a 486 DX2 66 at 4 megs of RAM, external PCIe, CIA, CD-ROM, floppy drive, no sound card, and a black and white dot matrix LCD screen. But I use it for work. I managed to get Windows 95 on it, even though I should have been using 3.1. And yeah, it had Nesticle on it, and I think I had Genesis running on it, but that was about the lot that I could run on it. And later on, a DOS-based Game Boy emulator. I'm trying to remember the name of it, but I could actually use the PC speaker to get sound out of it. It actually supported the PC speaker for the sound, although it was scratchy. It did synthesize it. Uh, Years later, I moved back to my parents' home after college for about a year or so, and they had gotten a Celeron 800 and Windows ME of all things, because I talked to the computer guy when he had done up the computer for them, asked for Windows 98, and he gave the BS excuse of, oh well, Windows 98 can't handle newer computers, and I'm thinking to myself, that's crap. But anyway, story for another day. Um, but I managed to get the VBA emulator running on it, Virtual Boy Advance, as well as Bleem. Bleem actually was able to run it pretty good, considering there was an 8 meg onboard video card, 3D video. I forget what it was. It's probably like a Savage S3 or something. Um, but it got working, and then years later, I was moved away and had my hands on another computer, and I was emulating it again. I never really touched on any emulation outside of that until the Wii came about, and I learned you could hack a Wii, and I was pretty happy then, because I could just sit down, have it plugged into a TV, no keyboard or anything like that, or finding a USB controller, and I was in pig shit heaven, really, because I was emulating everything up to and including the N64, and I had the classic Pro controller. It was on sale at my local Walmart where I was living for rather cheap, and so in doing that, I really started getting into it more and more, and seeing what you could do, and some of these systems that I never got to get my hands on. Like, I'd never been around a Neo Geo. That's how isolated my upbringing, I guess, and where I grew up to was. There were some arcade machines here and there, like I got to play the Star Wars games, etc. But yeah, Neo Geo was new to me, and there were some PlayStation games that were new to me, because later on I discovered you could hack an original Xbox, and actually on Instructables.com I show how you can hack an original Xbox, as well as on this channel I show how you can change an original Xbox controller into a USB controller. But yeah, I still have one. I have a hooked up component on my flat panel here, but that really opened up my eyes too, because like 32X really worked well. I got myself PSP 2000. Somebody was selling up the hill from me. This was about 10 years ago now. They were selling it for like $50, and I got myself a Pandora battery, blah blah blah, all that stuff. When you had to do that, instead now it's just software. Somebody cracked all the digital keys, etc. So pretty much any PSP can be hacked now, either temporarily or permanently. I have two over in that shelf actually behind me. But yeah, emulation, I've had not looked down upon it because I've had a lot of original hardware in that. But you know, it's fun, it's great, and now what's really good is this thing called the Raspberry Pi, which I use primarily, and it's kind of the point of the video too. I want to make because this isn't just for the response, but I want to show like what I do, and this is this is a modem casing. I gutted it, modified it, and there's a Raspberry Pi Model 1B Non Plus. I got this. I do have a Model 2B Plus, but that's not the point of it because that one's just over there. This is the one I actually do most of my emulation on. I modify the back so there's a 3.5 millimeter jack actually right here. There's 3.5 millimeter. There's composite video. I haven't populated the reset. The SD card slots there. Power. I haven't bothered to rewrite the power yet. This is Ethernet, and there is a breakout inside for Wi-Fi if I choose to do so. But on the front, there's 3 of the 4 USB ports. There's a 4-port hub. There's one internal in case I want to add Bluetooth or anything like that. The reason why I went with the Pi 1B is it was lying around collecting dust. The Pi 1B, I got it at the time. I made sure I had all the bells and whistles, so the intercooler with a fan and a heatsink. And as well, I discovered this thing from Popcornmix in the forums on the Retropie forums a little while ago, something called the test firmware. Now, what the test firmware allows you to do is, instead of outputting at 480i on a CRT, you can actually output via the composite, or if you have any other kind of video output, including the HDMI, I guess, you can output 240p. So I have a CRT here. I have a 27-inch Samsung. Model name escapes me, but I think it's this one. And yeah, so I actually primarily game on this with a Super Nintendo controller. Well, Nintendo slash Famicom, Super Famicom styled USB controller, because nothing on here necessitates having more than what's needed. You hear that smacking around there because I have a piece of equipment in here as well that's disconnected. It wasn't meant for Retropie. It's meant for if I were to use this more for OpenELEC or RasBMC, whatever the hell you call it. But I'm still not quite done with this. I'm going to be putting a bit more power into it. But I managed to keep the stand on this thing as well. So it's very console-ish, and I just have it plugged into my TV there on its side, and a controller plugged in. I'm playing pretty much all the 8-bit systems, 8-bit microcomputers, mostly the Commodore 64, but I do have Atari 8-bit on here as well. I have ran ST on this, and it does run ST. The overclock on this is 1150 megahertz, so you can hear the fan sometimes when it's going. It's not obnoxious, but it's running. I also have a lot of 16-bit stuff on here. Super Nintendo runs on this fine. Genesis slash Mega Drive. Sega CD slash Mega CD actually runs flawlessly on this, as does PC Engine CD. The one game I keep on here, because I only have an 8 gig card in this, I might get a bigger one later on and just clone the card and expand it, is Rondo of Blood for the PC Engine. I played on here, and it's great. Save states are a wonderful thing. Neo Geo as well. Sega SG-1000, I never was familiar with the system, but now I have it on there. A bunch of handhelds, so like Game Boy Advance, Game Boy Color, Game Gear, Atari Lynx. I've run out of space on the card, so I don't have much more in there. But Neo Geo Pocket Color you can do on this, and really the 240p looks a lot nicer. But yeah, I do most of my day-to-day emulation on this. I'll sit down almost every day, have a little plonk on it, and get a little bit further in Rondo of Blood, or I might want to play some Puzzle Bobble, or I don't know, fool around with a game that I never knew existed for the Famicom. And that's the thing too, like I have Gimmick on this, and it's a European and Japanese game, and I have the Japanese version, which has the expanded sound. And the emulator, I think it's NES Pi. There's a bunch of different emulators you can choose from. You don't have necessarily stick to one, and you can actually have different ROMs boot into different emulators depending. So you can play things with more sound support, for instance, like Famicom games where the Famicom supported expansion sound chips. but it's fun. I have nothing against emulation, and it saves me a lot of money because really, like right now, my finances aren't the best. I'm existing, existing. I guess you could say. I don't want to put on too many financial errors, but down the road, I want to start collecting again. I definitely can, but as of right now, this is how I play. This is how I emulate because mostly I'm a PC guy. Besides this, but I nowadays especially I go back more to the retro. But yeah, and we're gonna pop over to this, and I'm gonna show you the internals, and then we're gonna probably go with some gameplay. Okay, so here's my Pi. First thing we do is snap off the end. This is unaltered from it being a modem. Take out the SD card. Good indicator that this is a Pi 1. Now, if you flip it over, there's no screws. I had them foam I gotta take off, but I've managed to retain all 4 of the feet. But there's only 2 points retention in this whole build because of what I had to sacrifice for mounting space. So we'll just pop off the first, which is the front piece, and you notice here the still got sanded a bit, but this is the cutout for the USB. And there's one screw right here. So now right for the big reveal, piece of packing tape there to act as a hinge because there's no screws up here. So, move that out of the way. Ta-da! Alright, well, that was weird. I had this open earlier, I had to fix something, so I just wanted to show this as more of a point of function. Alright, so we'll zoom in a little bit. You see here, this is a 4-port USB hub. I have 1 port internal. I picked this for a reason because in case I wanted to add Wi-Fi or anything, and I did have Wi-Fi with an external, but I'm going to take this out for a reset button instead, and not a reset button, but a shutdown button. This is going to be replaced with. There's a reset button port right here in the back. I'm actually going to put a reset button here at some point, along with a power switch. And I'm actually going to externally power probably with another port cut in and power off the GPIO, and then that would allow me to have better power control and not have to just plug in here. I could actually just close this up a bit for an SD card slot. But yeah, there's 4-port, and it outputs to mini USB Type A, I believe they call this. And I shredded the end. I stripped the end, I should say, and wired on a USB. I just shaved down some old cables to get right down to the bare piece because, I don't have to worry about splicing or anything. I just solder directly on, just use some ribbon cable I had laying around. This is an original Xbox remote DVD kit piece, and I've soldered the IR sensor up to here. I'm going to try this out at some point. This is more a point of concept. I was trying out something for Xbox remote with Kodi. I haven't tried it out lately, but I'm going to try to get in sometime, but using a Pi 2. Pi 1's good enough for if you're using OpenELEC or something like that, but if you're using the version of Kodi packaged in the repository for Retropie, it's really sluggish because I think it's optimized for a quad core, and this is a single core that I'm using here. That's all I need really for what I'm doing. And this is the Pi 1 non-B+. And zooming in here a bit more, you can see that there's a intercooler, and it's powered off the GPIO here. It's on the 5-volt rail, 3 volts down here. 5 volts more of a fan, more RPMs to your fan. And it's a 3-piece copper heatsink kit, and it has a small fan, as you can see here, and I keep this fairly clear, but it's the Pi 1, so composite, AV, so this is, composite and stereo audio output, 3.5mm. HDMI is here, of course, camera, blah, blah. I'm not using any of this, but it only has 2 USB ports and an Ethernet port, so 2 USB here, Ethernet here, and I made a little breakout cable that goes to here. I actually took this off an old Ethernet card that was just not working, so I desoldered it and I glued it in here, and then made a breakout cable for it. Just stripped a cable and kept a few wires on there and just had it go through. There's the wire there, the USB there. Sorry, for the Xbox DVD. Now this is good for like Wi-Fi or Bluetooth if I decide to add it, but right now it's fine the way it is. Up along here, this is the jack for 3.5mm audio, just a flat ribbon cable, and the composite audio. composite video. But yeah, future considerations, I'm going to probably mount some switches here and a reset button, and probably put the power down button here, or maybe just put it out front, get rid of the IR sensor that's right here, and just put a power down button here maybe even, because there is consideration for it here as well, and I can just hot glue the crap out of it. Besides that, it's pretty much how I want it base as a base unit. So we'll zoom back out. And yeah, so all it is put it back together. Oh no, I think there's a loose part in there. No, okay, it's out. So we'll put this back together, and we'll get to showing it off on the TV. This reassembly is very simple. I just put that down, snap that on, and I got rubber feet on here so it can sit as a countertop unit, so it just sits like that. I might take some acetone to these and take these off, just so I just have the clear piece. I'm not going to repaint this because as basic black goes, it works. It looks fairly appliance-like. Sand this a little bit, and like I said, get rid of this probably magic eraser, even will take this off. But yeah, I was able to keep the base as it was as well, so I just push in the two tabs. Oh, one of the tabs broke, but I do actually have extras of these bases, so it's not a big thing. It's mostly needing the retention on this end anyway. But yeah, that's basically how it looks as a unit inside. Just put the SD card back now. Let's hook this up and show you, because there's a reason why I'm not using HDMI and I'm only using composite AV. Okay, so I'm just showing off just the setup here. The scan line's using Vampire for the master system. The TV outputs via its monitor to the game bridge via composite, and it's recording on that laptop using Virtual Dub. The theme you can see here is Pixel TFT. It's just nicer for the cover art when you scrape it, and it's very much more legible than the finer lettering. So one example here, of course, is Kirby on the NES, and you can see here versus the flickery 480i that you would usually see with a straight plugin. Using the 240p test firmware from Popcornmix really makes a big difference here as well with Game Boy Color games. Just it has a nicer look to it, and it doesn't change the color through 480i interlacing. One thing I want to show here too is even like the difference, like you notice, especially here, that's the Pi 2 running a 480i. This is my 480p, this is my 240p Pi. Say that 5 times fast. But one thing I did notice, look at the 2. Besides the fact that you see the scan lines, the color's different. Whereas this is a very red, and I didn't do any color changes or anything to the Pi itself. I just put everything in 240p, so you're actually seeing it behave how it should behave. Just real quick, and I'm just going to use the audio here because you can hear me fine. You can see the 240p scan lines are a lot better. So I figured that I would actually lead with a video now just showing some capture over 240p on my game bridge. This is over composite, so it's going to be a bit soft, but there's no flicker and no dot crawl. That's why I use 240p as opposed to 480i capture. And just showing an overview, there's a mixture of handhelds, 8-bit and 16-bit consoles, 8-bit computers, and even PC Engine, which we're going to go into now in a second. Reason being is I want to show that this system's even good for older CD-based games, like in the case of the PC Engine CD or Turbo CD. The scraper works great. It scrapes the appropriate artwork usually. Now, if the name is off or wrong, it will actually give you a erroneous result instead. Like, for instance, here's Ronald Blood, and it said Tower of Draga when it's Dracula X Ronald of Blood, but I don't have the actual Japanese name. By the way, if you're having problems running PC Engine CD games on your Pi, make sure your System Card 3 ROM is in the same folder as the bin and Q, and make sure you're using bin and Q. Bin and Q I find is a lot nicer. ISOs and MP3 files really mess things up a little bit, and they don't always repeat properly. So as you can see here, there is a little bit of composite artifacting in some of the white text, and there is a little bit of it here and there, but for the most part, as I showed earlier in the video, when you're doing 480i versus 240p, there's a lot of difference. Color reproduction is good. There's no flickering. There's that's a big issue I find with doing 480i versus 240p, because you're not doing a straight up 480p signal where it just upscales. It's having to do an interlaced flicker in order to accommodate all the real estate on screen. Now, I gotta say, there's no flaw in, I find, playing these PC Engine CD games. Same thing with Sega CD. I don't have any loaded on here currently, but playing a game like Snatcher or Puffle Mail or Shining Force, etc., they work quite well. There's no stutter. Make sure that you're running a Class 10 card though on the Pi. It really shows, like when you're streaming data from the SD card. Now there is an option in the Pi where you can actually go ahead and load off of the USB, which I'm going to do an overview video on later on, but you can do that now. We're going to flick through, and Fall and Burn Alpha is a good arcade emulator, and it does the job of a lot of stuff. I prefer it for Neo Geo titles, and we're going to play some Puzzle Bobble too. Now the cool thing is, games like this, like earlier instances, it wouldn't support save states, but now it does. I find the Pi FBA version out of the box doesn't work very well because the controller support really isn't there. So I just use the core for Fall and Burn Alpha, and it works quite nicely. But yeah, this isn't RGB or S-Video, I know, but I'm rather happy with the end result. Like, yes, you're going to see some artifacting, and that's just a matter of fact with composite video. But remember, back in the day, before composite, we had RF, so getting a much more refined signal is a big part of things. Now here's some Game Boy titles. The cover art for the most part works quite well, although you see a few little erroneous ones here and there. I don't know how they got into the Scrapers repository, but Dr. Mario's always a great game. And of course it looks great. It looks better on the TV than it does here in the capture, because the scan lines are present with the television, as opposed to here it isn't with the capture. And as I said, I'm using a game bridge. I'm using over composite. Virtual Dub works a lot better than the stock hard software that comes with the game bridge. The reason being is that the stock software, I think, is a Win Cinema. I could be wrong, but it only gives quality settings. It doesn't allow you to go within the parameters of the resolution. So you're going to get that flickery look to things, the jittery image, as well as I said, like dot crawl and artifacting, which really looks off. Like as I showed with the Mega Man 2 footage, that there's a big difference between the 480i and 240p. Now I started playing this one. I forgot, like, I have no file, so you have to watch all the opening cinematics. But it looks great. It worked rather well off of the capture. Now I think I did do a bit of a lower quality capture. I really just want to show the overview of how this looks on the TV. It looks spectacular, and you can go into the RetroArch settings and actually adjust things a bit more for aspect ratio, etc. You can even set customized settings for each ROM within an emulator. Say an emulator doesn't work with every ROM, but you found one that works great with that one ROM. You can actually set that one ROM to boot either with a different emulator or a different resolution on that emulator, etc., etc. But now we're going to look at some Game Boy Color for a minute. I think it's going to be Wario Land. Yeah, Wario Land 3, actually, right here. As well, Game Boy Color, it looks great. Now, as I said, same thing with this one. I forgot to set the file ahead of time. I refreshed some of my stuff on my Pi, so I did lose a couple of save files. Not all of them, though. I'm just using a Super Famicom style USB controller that I find works great for a lot of these games. I'm not using anything that requires a thumbstick. Commodore 64, even I'm using some of the LR cores, which work a lot nicer with things. So it does what it says on the tin kind of thing. I don't have to go into any menus. If you're using voice versus LR voice, for instance, you have to go in and just about every time, unless you set a file, set up your joystick, your keyboard, etc. Whereas with LR voice, I'm not having any of those issues, and I can go into the Retropie menu if I have to switch around joysticks. But the default stuff works, and just plugging in a controller also, it just works. And I really do enjoy this. There are tricks to get around for making Atari 8-bit systems, like the computer line and 5200 work as well. I am using the core, but not very many of the games boot. I have to sit down and use ETA Prime's tutorial for, you have to go in and manually set the BIOS files, so afterwards when you open up the emulator, like when you go to start a ROM, it doesn't just start. If it's not a core, it'll actually sometimes go into the emulator menu and you have to go around and select. But yeah, that's Game Boy Color. I'm flicking through here. Master System is another system that really looks nice on here, and of course a lot of the cover art. Now I have the just about entirety things here. I haven't seen how to get FM audio working with some of these games. Like, they support FM audio, but apparently the emulator, or at least this emulator, I haven't tried any others, it only supports the PGM sound, which is fine. Actually, this sound chip for the system is actually the same as in the Tandy 1000 line of computers and the ColecoVision, etc. This is Vampire. This is basically the Castlevania clone for the Master System, which is a great system. Of course, this is, you saw some of the footage there. The artifacting is just, a matter of fact with this capture, but I'm still getting used to it. But, yeah. So there's not a lot of composite crawl or anything like that, or dot crawl, I should say, and the composite bleeding that you get where colors kind of bleed together. I was doing a bit of filming, I think, at the same time here, so there's going to be a few seconds of just dead, no movement. But as you can see here, everything seems to look rather good. You can see definition of lines and everything around everything. Now, the Master System is 192p, I think. So what I did was, when I got all the emulators on the go with this, you hit any button, go into the setting just before the ROM actually boots, and you can set things to run either via video output or config. And I did go by config, which is 240p, but systems like this, you can see there's a little bit of issue here with the lines going a little bit weird as the character jumps, and that's mainly because I'm using the config file, which is 240p, to force a 192 the resolution, which is 48 lines more, so there isn't quite line doubling, so you're going to get this vertical, you're going to get this horizontal shimmering at times when I go around. Plus, the capture device I'm using only does 30 frames a second. It's hardwired to that. It doesn't do anything higher than that, which is why I wanted to also show the footage with my video camera as opposed to any external. Now, I might try some capture with my video camera because of the fact that it does have audio video input. So later on in some videos, I'm going to show that at work and see if there's actually any benefit to that versus using the Game Bridge, which I usually actually mostly use for dumping footage. Now, as I said, I'm using the Pixel TFT menu here. The TFT menu is meant for if you're making a handheld Pi and you need it, it's emulation station theme viewable for this Pixel emulation station theme menu viewable on a TFT screen, which is usually going to operate on composite. Now, NES as well. I should have shown how Gimmick works for for the Famicom because of its extra sound capability. But there are videos that have shown that off to no end. But this emulator works quite well. But yeah, that's how I emulate these days, at 240p on a Raspberry Pi. Enjoy!